"Harper," I said, my voice gentle, trying to coax her back. "What is it? You've been quiet all evening." It felt like an eternity before she finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, a fragile sound that almost got lost in the patter of the rain. I need some time to think." "Okay," I said, the word a soft exhale. A faint, almost sad smile touched my lips. "Time to think," she'd said. In my mind, that wasn't a request for space. It was a gentle way of saying goodbye, a way of letting me down easy. And maybe, I thought, maybe that was for the best. Maybe she knew something I didn't. So I'd give her time. All the time she needed. Forever, if that's what it took. I wouldn't call. I wouldn't write. I wouldn't haunt her doorstep, begging for answers. I would simply disappear. It was the only way I knew how to deal with this kind of pain, to bury it deep, to walk away and never look back. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, one of our mutual friends. "Heard about you and Harper, thinking of you. Want to talk?" I stared at the message, then deleted it. No, I didn't want to talk. I wanted to disappear. I opened my contacts, scrolled down to Harper, and hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Delete? Unfollow? Those felt too passive. I needed something more decisive. I hit block. A small, cold satisfaction settled in my chest. It was a childish act, perhaps, but it felt necessary. A clean break. Later, I sat on the bare floor, surrounded by empty walls. The car was gone, sold to a dealership for a price I didn't even care about. It had been our car, the one we'd driven on countless road trips filled with music and laughter. Now it was just another transaction, another loose end tied up. My phone rang again. This time it was my boss, Mr. Henderson. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Ethan, I got your email. Are you serious about this? Quitting? Just like that?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and concern. "Yes, sir, I'm afraid so. Effective immediately." I paused. "I apologize for any inconvenience." "Inconvenience, Ethan? You're one of my best project managers. What's going on?" "Personal reasons," I said, the words feeling hollow even to my own ears. "I can't discuss it. I've already sent over my handover notes." He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. "Well, I can't force you to stay, but the door is always open, Ethan, always." "Thank you, sir," I said, and hung up. That was it. No job, no car, no Harper, just nothing. The next morning I left the keys with Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor who always watered our plants when we were away. "For the landlord," I said, handing her the keys and a small sealed envelope. "Leaving so soon, dear?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, forcing a smile. "New adventures." She patted my hand. "You take care of yourself, Ethan." The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt unwinding through a blur of landscapes. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. I slept in cheap motels, the kind with flickering neon signs and paper-thin walls. I ate greasy diner food, the taste of it barely registering. I was a ghost, drifting through the country, unseen, unacknowledged. I worked odd jobs, dishwashing in a smoky diner in Nevada, where the waitress called me honey, and the coffee tasted like burnt dirt. Construction in Arizona, hauling lumber under a scorching sun, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. I kept a journal, a small, leather-bound book, but the entries were terse, factual. July 12th. Drove 300 miles. Gas, $45. Motel, $30. No emotions, no reflections. Just a record of my escape. I avoided cities, sticking to back roads and small towns. I grew a beard, let my hair grow long and shaggy. I was becoming someone else, someone unrecognizable, even to myself. It was a deliberate act of erasure. One entry, scrawled in the middle of the night in a motel room in Utah, was just a single word, repeated over and over. Why? 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 But I quickly scratched it out, tearing the page from the journal and burning it in the ashtray. I couldn't afford to ask why. I just had to keep moving. It was a late afternoon in autumn when I stumbled upon the town. I wasn't even sure what state I was in anymore. I'd been driving for hours, following a winding mountain road that seemed to lead nowhere. Then, the trees opened up, and I saw it. A small valley, nestled between towering peaks, their slopes ablaze with the colors of fall. The town itself was small, just a few streets lined with quaint wooden buildings. It looked like something out of a postcard, picturesque and untouched by time. I felt a pull, a strange sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. I found a diner, a rundown place called The Hungry Bear. The air inside was thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. I sat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries. Two old men were sitting nearby, talking in low voices. I caught snippets of their conversation. Millers are in a tough spot. Lodge is falling apart and can't afford to fix it. The Millers. The Lodge. Something about it piqued my interest. Maybe it was the desperation in their voices, or maybe it was just the need to stop running, to find something to anchor myself to. "Excuse me," I said to the waitress, a plump woman with a kind smile. "I overheard those gentlemen talking about the Millers. What's the story?" She sighed. "Ah, poor old folks. They own the Mountain View Lodge, up on the hill. Used to be the pride of this town, but it's seen better days. They're too old to keep up with it, and they're drowning in debt." "Is it for sale?" I asked, the question surprising even myself. She shrugged. "Doubt they'd find a buyer. It needs a lot of work." I paid for my meal, left a generous tip, and walked out. I found a boarding house, a creaky old Victorian building with a vacancy sign hanging crookedly in the window. I paid for a week in cash. I needed to stay. I needed to see this lodge. The next morning, I drove up the winding road to the Mountain View Lodge. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the valley and the surrounding mountains. But the lodge itself was a sad sight. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and several windows were boarded up. It had a grandeur to it, a faded elegance, but it was clearly in desperate need of repair. I parked my truck and walked up to the front door. I hesitated, then knocked. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and an elderly woman peered out. She had kind eyes, but her face was etched with worry. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. I heard you might be needing some help with the lodge," I said, feeling awkward. "I'm handy with tools. I could lend a hand?" She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "We can't afford to pay anyone," she said bluntly. "I'm not looking for pay," I replied. "Just room and board, maybe?" She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "I'm Martha Miller, and this," she gestured to a tall, thin man standing behind her, "is my husband, George." George Miller extended a hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You looking for work, son?" "Something like that," I said, shaking his hand. "I'm Ethan." I spent the rest of the day working alongside the Millers. I started small, fixing a broken window, patching a hole in the roof, clearing debris from the yard. I found a rhythm in the work, a solace in the physical exertion. It was a way to quiet the noise in my head, to focus on something tangible, something real. Martha watched me work, her initial suspicions slowly melting away. "You're a good worker, Ethan," she said, offering me a glass of lemonade. "Where'd you learn to do all this?" "Here and there," I said vaguely. "Picked it up along the way." George chuckled. "A man of mystery, eh?" I smiled, a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. Something like that. By the end of the week, I was practically living at the lodge. I ate meals with the Millers, listened to their stories, and felt a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was craving. They were good people, kind and generous, despite their hardships. And the lodge, it was more than just a building. It was a place with history, with soul. I felt a connection to it, a desire to restore it to its former glory. The renovation became my obsession. I worked from dawn till dusk, pouring all my energy, all my pent-up emotions, into the project. I started with the essentials: repairing the roof, fixing the plumbing, replacing broken windows. Then I moved on to the more ambitious tasks: rebuilding the porch, restoring the original wood floors, renovating the guest rooms. I learned as I went. I watched online tutorials, read books on carpentry and construction, and asked George for advice whenever I got stuck. He was a surprisingly skilled craftsman himself, and he taught me a lot about the old ways of doing things. "Measure twice, cut once, son," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "That's the secret to good carpentry. And life, too, I reckon." I started to develop a reputation in the town. People would stop by the lodge, curious about the transformation taking place. They'd offer to help, bringing food, tools, and encouragement. I realized I wasn't so alone anymore. I was becoming part of a community. Martha treated me like a son. She'd make sure I ate properly, fuss over me when I got injured, which happened more often than I'd like to admit, and tell me stories about the lodge's history, about the guests who had stayed there over the years, the weddings, the celebrations, the quiet moments of reflection. "This place has seen a lot of life, Ethan," she said one evening, as we sat on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. "It's good to see it coming back to life again." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. It wasn't just the lodge that was coming back to life. It was me, too. Slowly, painfully, I was starting to heal. The work was a balm, a way to channel my grief and guilt into something positive, something tangible. I still thought about Harper, of course. Her memory was a constant presence, a shadow that followed me everywhere. But the sharp edges of the pain were starting to soften. I could think about her now without that crushing sense of despair. I could even smile, sometimes, remembering the good times we'd shared. It was a cold winter evening, almost a year after I'd arrived in town. The lodge was mostly finished, looking better than it had in decades. The Millers and I were sitting by the fireplace in the main lounge, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. "Ethan," George said, his voice serious, "Martha and I have been talking." I looked at them, a sense of apprehension creeping over me. Martha took my hand, her touch warm and comforting. "We're getting old, son. We can't keep up with this place anymore." "We've been thinking," George continued, "about selling the lodge." My heart sank. I'd come to think of this place as my home, the Millers as my family. The thought of leaving was unbearable. "But," Martha said, her eyes twinkling, "we wouldn't sell it to just anyone. We'd want it to go to someone who cares about it as much as we do, someone who'd keep its spirit alive." George nodded. "We'd like to sell it to you, Ethan." I was stunned. I hadn't expected this. "But I don't know if I can afford it," I stammered. "We're not asking for much," George said. "Just enough to cover our debts and give us a little something to live on. We know you'll take good care of it." I thought about it for a long moment. I had savings, more than I'd realized. My frugal lifestyle on the road, combined with the money I'd earned from odd jobs, had accumulated into a substantial sum. It was enough. I'd be honored, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'll do my best to make you proud. And so I became the owner of the Mountain View Lodge. The Millers stayed on, of course. They were part of the deal. They became my advisors, my confidants, my family. The lodge became my life's work. I poured all my energy into making it a success. I had a knack for hospitality, it turned out. I understood what people were looking for. A place to escape, to reconnect with nature, to find peace and quiet. I expanded the lodge, adding more cabins, each one carefully designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. I built a restaurant, serving locally sourced food, prepared with simple elegance. I added a spa, offering treatments inspired by the natural world. I marketed the lodge as a haven of silence and seclusion, attracting guests from all over the world. Writers, artists, musicians, stressed-out executives, they all came seeking refuge from the noise and chaos of modern life. Word spread. The lodge was featured in travel magazines, on websites, in social media posts. I became known as the Mountain Man, the reclusive entrepreneur who had created a sanctuary in the wilderness. I eventually bought other properties in nearby mountain areas, carefully selecting locations that offered the same sense of tranquility and natural beauty. I built a small chain of silent mountain resorts, each one reflecting my commitment to simplicity, sustainability, and serenity. I became wealthy, far wealthier than I'd ever imagined. But money was never the motivation. It was a byproduct of my passion, my dedication to creating spaces of peace. I used my wealth to support the local community, to protect the environment, to give back to the place that had given me so much. Now, I was in my late 30s. I lived in a beautiful cabin, built on a hillside overlooking the original lodge. It was a minimalist space, all clean lines and natural materials. Large windows framed stunning views of the mountains. It was a reflection of my inner state, uncluttered, spacious, but also empty. I had no close relationships. I had employees, business partners, acquaintances, but no one I could truly call a friend. The Millers were the closest thing I had to family, but even with them I maintained a certain distance. I'd built walls around my heart, thick, impenetrable walls, designed to protect me from the pain of loss. Sometimes late at night, I'd find myself digging out a small wooden box from the back of a closet. Inside were a few old photos of Harper, a dried flower she'd given me, a handwritten note. I'd look at them, trace her face with my fingertip, and feel a pang of longing so intense it almost took my breath away. But then I'd quickly put them back, sealing the box, burying it deep, just like I'd buried my emotions. I was a man who had achieved everything, yet possessed nothing of real value. I had found peace, a kind of stoic acceptance of my solitude, but I had not found happiness. I was a ghost in my own life, a successful, respected, and utterly alone. I had traded a life of love for a life of building. It was another one of those days. Rain lashed against the windows of my office, a relentless drumming that matched the rhythm of my own restless thoughts. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet filled with numbers that seemed to blur and shift before my eyes. I couldn't focus. The mail arrived, a small stack of envelopes delivered by Sarah, the young woman who managed the front desk. Mostly bills, a few brochures, the usual junk. But then I saw it. A handwritten envelope, addressed in a script I didn't recognize. The postmark was from my hometown. My heart skipped a beat. A wave of unease washed over me, a cold premonition. I almost tossed it aside, unopened. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be reminded of the life I'd left behind, but something Some stubborn sense of curiosity, or perhaps a lingering hope, made me hesitate. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. The paper felt thin and fragile in my hand. I turned it over, examining the return address. A name I didn't know, a street I vaguely remembered. I took a deep breath and ripped it open. The letter was written in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. I scanned the first few lines, my eyes widening in disbelief. Noah, Harper's younger brother. I remembered him as a skinny, energetic kid, always tagging along behind Harper, full of questions and mischief. I sat down heavily in my chair, the spreadsheet forgotten. I began to read, slowly, carefully, absorbing each word. Ethan, I know this is probably coming out of the blue, and I don't even know if this letter will reach you. I've been trying to find you for months. I hope this address is still correct. It's about Harper. She's gone. She disappeared 3 years ago. The police investigated, but they couldn't find anything. The case went cold. I know you and Harper. It didn't end well, but I always hoped that you still cared about her. I'm desperate, Ethan. I've followed every lead, every dead end. I'm running out of options. I found some old social media posts, some mutual friends. That's how I tracked you down. I know it's a long shot, but I'm begging you. If you know anything at all, that could help me find her, please contact me. I'm including my phone number and email address. Please, Ethan. Please help me find my sister. She's all the family I have left. Noah. The letter slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. I stared at it, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. Harper. Gone. Disappeared. The words echoed in my mind, a hollow, terrifying sound. The past, the life I'd so carefully buried, came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Memories flooded my mind. Harper's laughter, her smile, the way she used to look at me, as if I were the only person in the world. The scent of her perfume, the feel of her hand in mine, the sound of her voice singing softly along to the radio. Guilt, sharp and agonizing, pierced through me. I'd abandoned her. I'd walked away without a backward glance, convinced I was doing the right thing, giving her the space she'd asked for. But what if she'd needed me? What if I'd misinterpreted everything? I looked out the window at the mountains that had become my refuge, my sanctuary. For years, I'd found solace in their silence, in their unchanging presence. They represented stability, security, a life free from the messy complications of human relationships. But now, the mountains seemed to mock me. Their silence felt oppressive, their grandeur indifferent. What good was all this, if Harper was out there, somewhere, alone and in need? The decision was a battle waged within me. One part of me, the wounded, fearful part, wanted to stay hidden, to protect the fragile peace I'd built. The other part, the part that still loved Harper, that had never stopped loving her, screamed at me to go back, to face the past, to do whatever it took to find her. It wasn't a logical decision. It was a gut feeling, a primal instinct. It was the realization that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. I read Noah's phone number, memorized it, then picked up my own phone. I had to make some calls. The next few hours were a blur of activity. I called my most trusted employee, Sarah, the one who had delivered the mail. Sarah, I need you to take over for a while, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Something's come up. I have to leave town. Of course, Mr. Harding, she replied, her voice calm and efficient. How long will you be gone? I don't know, I admitted. It could be a few days, it could be longer. Don't worry about a thing, she said. We've got this covered, just take care of yourself. I thanked her, feeling a surge of gratitude for her loyalty and competence. I then called the Millers, who were having dinner at the lodge. George, Martha, I said, I need to ask a favor." "Anything, Ethan?" George replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "I have to go away for a while. A family matter. I don't know how long I'll be gone." There was a brief silence, then Martha said, "You go, son. We'll keep things running here. Just be careful." "I will," I promised. I packed a small bag, throwing in a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my journal. This time the bag felt heavy, laden with the weight of the past, the uncertainty of the future. I stood in the doorway of my cabin, looking back at the life I'd built. It was a good life, a comfortable life. But it wasn't enough. I got into my truck, the engine roaring to life in the quiet mountain air. As I drove away, the mountains loomed behind me, silent witnesses to my departure. The closer I got to my hometown, the more the anxiety gnawed at me. I was driving back into the storm, into the heart of the pain I'd tried so hard to escape. But this time, I wasn't running away. I was running towards something, towards Harper, towards the truth, towards a chance, however slim, at redemption. I checked into a generic hotel on the edge of town, using the name Mr. Harris. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, not yet. I needed time to gather information, to understand what had happened to Harper before facing the ghosts of our shared life. I'd arranged to meet Noah at a diner on the outskirts of town, a place with faded booths and a clientele of truckers and early risers. I chose it for its anonymity, its distance from the heart of our old life. I spotted him immediately. He was sitting in a booth by the window, his face illuminated by the pale morning light. He was older, of course. The teenage boy I remembered replaced by a man in his late 20s. His face was lined with worry, his eyes tired and shadowed. He carried the weight of his sister's disappearance like a physical burden. "Noah?" I said, approaching the booth. He looked up, startled. Then recognition dawned in his eyes. "Ethan?" He stood up, extending a hand. His grip was firm, but his hand trembled slightly. We exchanged awkward greetings, the years of silence a palpable barrier between us. He looked me over, taking in my changed appearance, the beard, the weathered face, the clothes that spoke of a life lived outdoors. You look different," he said, stating the obvious. "It's been a while," I replied, a weak smile playing on my lips. We sat down, the silence stretching between us again. A waitress came and took our orders. Coffee for both of us, black. "Thank you for coming," Noah said, his voice earnest. "I really appreciate it." "I had to," I said, the words feeling inadequate. He nodded, understanding. He pulled a worn cardboard box from the seat beside him and placed it on the table. "I brought some of Harper's things," he said. "I thought, maybe you could look through them, see if anything rings a bell. The police, they didn't find anything." He explained the details of Harper's disappearance, his voice flat, reciting the facts like a well-worn script. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind her phone, her wallet, her keys. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no clues. The police investigation had gone cold months ago. They'd classified it as a voluntary disappearance, implying that Harper had simply chosen to leave. "I don't believe that," Noah said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She wouldn't just leave. Not without a word. Not without telling me." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You knew her, Ethan. You knew her better than anyone. Do you think she would have done that?" I met his gaze, feeling the weight of his question, the weight of my own guilt. "No," I said, my voice firm. "No, she wouldn't." He handed me the box. It was filled with Harper's belongings, her favorite books, a worn teddy bear, a collection of seashells, a stack of letters, and several journals. The scent of her perfume, faint but familiar, wafted up from the box, a ghost of her presence. It was like opening a time capsule, a portal to a past I thought I'd buried forever. Noah had arranged for us to meet with some of our old mutual friends, people who had known Harper and me as a couple. It was a painful, awkward process, walking back into a life I'd deliberately abandoned. We met Sarah, Harper's best friend, at a coffee shop. She looked shocked to see me, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Ethan, is that really you?" "It's me, Sarah," I said, managing a small smile. She hugged me, a tight, brief embrace. I heard about what happened," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sympathy and unspoken accusation. "With Harper, I mean." We sat down, Noah joining us. Sarah told us about Harper's struggles after our breakup. She'd become withdrawn, depressed, losing interest in everything she used to enjoy. She'd dropped out of college, lost her job, and started isolating herself from her friends. "She never got over you, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice tinged with sadness. "She really loved you." Her words were like a punch to the gut. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, a crushing sense of responsibility. We met with other friends, each encounter a variation on the same theme. They were surprised to see me, curious about my life, but also wary, hesitant to delve too deeply into the past. They all confirmed what Sarah had said. Harper had spiraled after our breakup. They spoke of her increasing isolation, her erratic behavior, rumors of a breakdown, whispers of mental health issues. "We tried to help her," one friend said, his voice filled with regret. "But she pushed us all away. She just shut down." Later that day, Noah took me to Harper's old apartment. He had kept paying the rent, hoping she would return, unable to bring to let go. "I haven't touched anything," Noah said, his voice hushed. I wanted it to be just as she left it." I walked through the apartment, touching objects gingerly, as if they might break at any moment. I saw her easel in the corner, a half-finished painting still on it. I saw her favorite mug on the kitchen counter, stained with coffee rings. I saw her handwriting on a notepad by the phone, a grocery list, a reminder to call her mother. It was overwhelming, the sheer ordinariness of it all, the evidence of a life lived, then abruptly abandoned. I felt a deep ache in my chest, a profound sense of loss, not just for Harper, but for the life we could have had together. I knew I had to see Harper's parents. It was the most difficult step, the one I'd been dreading the most. I knew they blamed me for what had happened to Harper. I knew they wouldn't welcome me with open arms. Noah was hesitant, but I insisted. "I need to talk to them," I said. "I need to understand what happened." We drove to their house, a large, imposing Victorian in the oldest part of town. It was a house I'd visited many times before, a place that had once felt like a second home. Now it felt cold and forbidding. Mrs. Miller opened the door, her face hardening when she saw me. "Ethan," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "About Harper." She hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing us to enter. The house was silent, filled with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Mr. Miller was sitting in the living room reading a newspaper. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw me. "You," he said, his voice filled with barely controlled anger. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here." "I know you blame me," I said, trying to remain calm. "But I need to know what happened to Harper. I need to understand." "You abandoned her," Mrs. Miller said, her voice sharp. "You broke her heart. You left her when she needed you the most." "I didn't know," I said. the words feeling inadequate, hollow. I didn't know she was struggling. "You should have known," Mr. Miller shouted, slamming his newspaper down on the coffee table. "You should have been there for her." The confrontation escalated quickly. They accused me of being selfish, of being insensitive, of being the cause of all of Harper's problems. I tried to defend myself, to explain my actions, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. "We know more than you think we know, young man," Mr. Miller said, his eyes blazing. I realized they were hiding something. They knew more about Harper's disappearance than they were letting on. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What happened to Harper? Where is she?" The argument reached a fever pitch, ending with Mr. Miller ordering me to leave, his face contorted with rage. "Get out of my house," he roared, "and don't ever come back." I left, feeling defeated and frustrated. But I also felt a flicker of determination. I knew they were lying. I knew they were hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. Back at Noah's apartment, we were both exhausted and disheartened. The confrontation with Harper's parents had been emotionally draining, leaving us with more questions than answers. Noah, however, hadn't given up. He'd been spending hours poring over Harper's journals, searching for any clue, any hint of what might have happened to her. "Ethan," he said suddenly, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and sadness. I think I found something." He held up one of the journals, his hand trembling. "This entry. It's from a few weeks before she disappeared." He began to read aloud, his voice faltering at times. Harper's words, written in her familiar, looping script, filled the room. "The shadows are getting longer," he read. "The voices are getting louder. I'm scared, Ethan. I'm so scared. They're telling me things, terrible things. They're telling me I'm a danger to everyone I love. I went to see a doctor. He said I have something called schizophrenia. He said it's a disease of the mind. He said it can be treated, but I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I'm thinking about leaving, about disappearing. It would be better for everyone, especially for Ethan. He deserves someone normal, someone who doesn't hear voices, someone who doesn't see things that aren't there. He deserves to be happy, and I can't give him that anymore. I love him so much. I'll always love him, but I have to protect him. I have to let him go." Noah stopped reading, his eyes filled with tears. She broke up with you to protect you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. She thought she was a burden." I sat there, stunned, unable to speak. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Harper hadn't stopped loving me. She'd been suffering, silently, battling a terrifying illness. And I, in my ignorance, in my pride, had abandoned her. We went back to Harper's parents' house, armed with the journal, with the undeniable proof of their daughter's suffering. This time I didn't ask. I demanded. "You knew," I said, my voice cold and hard. "You knew about her illness. You knew why she broke up with me." They tried to deny it at first. They tried to bluster, to deflect, to blame me again, but I wouldn't let them. I showed them the journal entry, forced them to read Harper's own words. Finally, Mrs. Miller broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Mr. Miller's face crumpled, his anger replaced by a look of utter defeat. "We were scared," Mrs. Miller confessed, her voice trembling. "We didn't know what to do. We thought we were protecting her." They admitted that they had known about Harper's diagnosis. They had feared the stigma of mental illness, the judgment of their friends and neighbors. They had convinced themselves that they could handle it on their own, that they could protect Harper from the world. They revealed that they had forced Harper into treatment abroad, at a private clinic in Switzerland. They had told her it was a retreat, a place to rest and recover. They had intercepted her letters to me, destroying them to prevent me from contacting her, from interfering with their plans. We thought it was for the best, Mr. Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. We thought we were doing the right thing. Their words were a twisted justification for their actions, a desperate attempt to absolve themselves of guilt. But I saw the pain in their eyes, the regret, the realization that they had made a terrible mistake. I felt a surge of anger, so intense it made me shake. I wanted to lash out, to scream at them, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on Harper, on me. "You destroyed her life," I shouted, my voice raw with emotion. "You took away her choices, her freedom, her love. You kept us apart. You lied to me, you lied to her, you lied to everyone." But then I saw the devastation in their faces, the utter hopelessness of their situation, and the anger began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of grief. I realized that Harper had never stopped loving me. She had sacrificed her own happiness to protect me, to shield me from the burden of her illness. And I, in my ignorance, had walked away, leaving her to face her demons alone. I sank to my knees, the weight of my guilt crushing me. I wept, openly, unashamedly, for the lost years, for the lost love, for the pain that Harper had endured. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to truly grieve, to feel the full force of my loss. After leaving the Miller residence, I sat with Noah at his kitchen table. He pushed the box of Harper's belongings towards me. "I can't go through these right now, Ethan. I just can't." I nodded slowly, a lump in my throat. He left, and I sat alone with the box. I opened the letters, one by one. They were not addressed, but they were clearly meant for me. Harper's words were a window to her soul, and to our love. She wrote about the small joys, the mundane. She wrote about her fears, about the voices, but most of all, she wrote about hope. She talked about us, about what she dreamed we would do, the places we would see. I saw a painting of a small cove today. It had a little house overlooking the sea. Can you picture us there, Eth? Maybe someday. I recognized the description. I had even bought her that painting. I knew now. There was a map in her head, a path she'd laid out, even in her darkest hours. I felt a glimmer of hope, the first real spark since receiving Noah's letter. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, a vivid image of a painting I'd given Harper years ago. It was a landscape, a depiction of a secluded cove on the coast. We'd stumbled upon it during a weekend trip, a hidden gem tucked away from the tourist crowds. It had become our place, a symbol of our shared love for the sea, for solitude, for each other. "Noah," I said, my voice urgent. "Do you still have that painting? The one I gave Harper of the coast?" He looked at me, puzzled. "I think so. It's in storage with some of her other things." "Why?" "I need to see it," I said. I think there might be something there." We drove to Noah's apartment, a small, cluttered space filled with boxes and memories. He found the painting, wrapped in bubble wrap, leaning against a wall. I carefully unwrapped it, my hands trembling with anticipation. It was exactly as I remembered it, a serene landscape, depicting a rocky cove, a crescent of sandy beach, and a small, white cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. I examined the painting closely, running my fingers over the canvas, searching for anything unusual. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost invisible inscription, scratched into the paint on the back of the canvas, near the artist's signature. It was a line from a poem by E. Cummings, a poem we both loved, a poem about finding peace and solace in nature. "For whatever we lose like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea." My heart leaped. It was a message, a clue. Harper had left me a breadcrumb trail, a path to follow. She wanted me to find her. The drive to the coast was a blur of highway and anticipation. Noah was mostly silent, lost in his own thoughts, and I was grateful for the quiet. We checked into a small, rustic inn, the Seagull's Rest, the only one in the immediate vicinity. It was the kind of place with weathered shingles, creaky floors, and a view of the ocean that could steal your breath away. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying every conversation with Harper, every shared moment, searching for clues I might have missed, for any sign that I could have prevented her pain. The next morning we began our search. We showed Harper's photo, an older one, taken before the shadows had crept into her eyes, to anyone who would look. We started in the small villages that dotted the coastline, places with names like Ocean View and Sea Breeze, places that seemed to exist outside of time. We visited a rocky outcrop that jutted out into the sea, a place that mirrored a similar spot in the painting. I remembered a picnic we'd had there years ago. Harper had packed a basket with cheese, bread, and wine. We'd sat on a blanket, watching the waves crash against the rocks, talking about our dreams, our fears, our future. She loved the sound of the waves, I said to Noah, my voice catching in my throat. Said it calmed her. Noah nodded. His eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. We found a small, secluded beach, hidden between two towering cliffs. On a whim, I checked a nearby trash can, half expecting, half hoping. And there it was, a discarded sketchbook, its cover torn and water-stained. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. The drawings were rough, unfinished, but the style? It was unmistakably Harper's. She'd captured the curve of the coastline, the way the light danced on the water, the wild beauty of the place. Later, in a small town further up the coast, we stopped at a general store. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, studied Harper's photo intently. I think I recognize her, she said slowly. Comes in here sometimes, buys art supplies. Quiet girl, keeps to herself. Do you know her name? I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. Doesn't say much, the woman replied. But I think she said her name was different, not Harper. Do you remember what it was? Noah pressed. The woman frowned, concentrating. Started with an E? Eleanor? Eliza? Something like that? The trail, faint as it was, led us to a village that seemed to have sprung straight from the painting itself. It was a cluster of colorful houses clinging to a hillside, overlooking a small, sheltered cove. Art galleries lined the main street, their windows displaying vibrant paintings and whimsical sculptures. The air hummed with a creative energy, a sense of peaceful bohemianism. This was a place where someone like Harper, an artist at heart, could find refuge. We went to the largest art gallery, the Cove Gallery. A bell jingled as we entered. The walls were covered with paintings, mostly landscapes and seascapes. A middle-aged woman with paint-splattered overalls and a warm smile greeted us. "Can I help you?" she asked. I took a deep breath and showed her Harper's photo. "We're looking for this woman," I said. "We were told she might be in this area." The woman studied the photo, her eyes widening slightly. "Elena," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "That's Elena. She teaches art classes to the children here at the community center. She's a wonderful artist, very talented." My heart leaped. Elena! Harper! I felt a surge of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I was close, so close. "Do you know where she lives?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure," the woman said. "She has a little cottage on the cliffs just outside of town. It's the one with the white picket fence and the flower boxes. You can't miss it." She gave us detailed directions, her smile reassuring. We followed the gallery owner's directions, driving slowly along a winding coastal road. And then there it was. A small, whitewashed cottage, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was exactly like the cottage in the painting. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life, of warmth. Flower boxes overflowing with bright blooms adorned the windowsills. It was a picture of idyllic peace, a haven. I parked the truck a short distance away. Noah looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "You should go alone," he said. This is between you and her." I nodded, understanding. He was right. This was a moment I needed to face alone. I reached the gate, a white picket fence, just as the gallery owner had described. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the latch. Then, I took a deep breath and pushed it open. I walked up the short path to the front door, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. I raised my hand to knock, then paused. I could hear the faint sound of music coming from inside. A classical piece, something by Debussy, I thought. Harper loved Debussy. I took another deep breath and knocked. The music stopped. A moment of silence stretched out, long and heavy. Then the door opened. Harper stood before me. She was older, of course. There were lines around her eyes, faint wrinkles that hadn't been there before. Her hair, once a cascade of auburn curls, was shorter, streaked with silver. She was thinner, her frame more fragile, but her eyes were the same. That clear, piercing blue, the color of the sea on a summer day. They were the eyes I had fallen in love with, the eyes that had haunted my dreams for years. She recognized me instantly. Her eyes widened, and a flicker of surprise crossed her face. Then, a wave of other emotions washed over her. Joy, sadness, confusion, and, yes, fear. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she couldn't quite believe I was real. I didn't say anything. Words seemed inadequate, meaningless. I just looked at her, drinking in her presence, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the vibrant, carefree girl I remembered. The years had changed her, etched their mark upon her. But the essence of Harper, the spirit I had loved, was still there, shining through. I didn't rush to embrace her. I didn't want to overwhelm her. I sensed a fragility about her, a vulnerability that demanded respect. I stood there, waiting, giving her space to process my arrival. She stepped back, inviting me inside. The cottage was small, but cozy and filled with light. The walls were adorned with her artwork, paintings of the sea, the cliffs, the village, drawings of birds, flowers, and local characters. Even a few small, whimsical sculptures. It was a space that breathed creativity, a reflection of her soul. We sat down at a small, round table near the window, overlooking the ocean. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of crashing waves and endless horizon. I didn't expect to see you," she said, her voice still hesitant. "Noah found me," I replied. "He told me you were missing." She nodded, looking down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I should have contacted him," she said, "but it was complicated." She began to tell me her story, her voice slow and measured, as if she were carefully choosing each word. She confirmed what Noah had discovered in her journal: the diagnosis of schizophrenia, the terrifying hallucinations, the paranoia, the overwhelming fear that she would hurt someone she loved. I thought I was protecting you, Ethan," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I thought it would be better if you didn't know, if you didn't have to deal with me." She told me about the clinic in Switzerland, the sterile environment, the endless therapy sessions, the medication that dulled her senses but also quieted the voices. "It helped, she said. But it wasn't living. I felt like a prisoner, trapped in my own mind. She explained how she had eventually run away, not to escape treatment, but to find her own way to heal on her own terms. She'd changed her name to Elena, a way to shed the burden of her past, to start anew. I found this place, she said, gesturing around the cottage, and it felt right. The sea, the art, the quiet, it helped me to find some peace. She was lucid, articulate, her thoughts clear and coherent. But there was a fragility about her, a vulnerability that made my heart ache. The illness hadn't vanished. It was simply managed, controlled. She was still walking a tightrope, still battling her inner demons. I listened patiently, letting her speak without interruption. I offered her no judgment, only understanding and compassion. When she finished, I told her about my own journey, about the years I'd spent running away, hiding in the mountains, building a life that was successful but ultimately empty. I made a mistake, Harper, I said, my voice raw with emotion. I should have been there for you. I should have listened. I should have fought for us. I didn't ask her to forgive me. I didn't deserve her forgiveness. I didn't ask her to come back to me. I didn't expect her to abandon the life she'd built here. I just wanted her to know one thing. I never stopped loving you, Harper, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. Never. The unspoken question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. Is there any hope for us? After all this time, after all this pain, could we ever find our way back to each other? Harper looked down, fiddling with a small, smooth stone she'd picked up from the beach. Her fingers traced its contours, as if seeking an answer in its texture. The silence stretched, filled only with the sound of the waves outside. Finally, she lifted her head, her blue eyes meeting mine. I waited, Ethan, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I waited so long. I painted this cottage, she gestured around the room, hoping somehow you'd find this place. And me. A faint smile touched her lips, a bittersweet expression of longing and resignation. But then the years passed, and I wasn't even sure if I deserved a second chance with you. After everything, after all the pain I caused, I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't try to sweep away her doubts with empty promises. I understood her hesitation, her fear. She'd been through so much, and she needed time, space, and most importantly, respect. I understand, I said, my voice gentle. I don't expect anything from you, Harper. I needed to see you, to know you were okay, to tell you the truth. I paused, taking a deep breath. Are you happy here, Harper? It was a difficult question, but I needed to know. She looked around the cottage, at her paintings, at the view of the ocean. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Some days are harder than others, she admitted, her voice honest. The shadows. They still come, but yes, Ethan, I'm at peace here. I've found a way to live, to create, to be. I didn't ask her to come back with me. I didn't try to recreate the past. I knew that wasn't possible. But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving her again, of disappearing from her life once more. Can I stay for a little while? I asked, my voice hesitant, almost pleading. Not here, not in your space, but in the village. There's that inn, the Seagull's Rest. They have rooms for rent, just to be near you, to get to know you again, as friends. It was a risk, a vulnerable offer. She could easily refuse. She could tell me to leave, to go back to my mountain, to my solitary life. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge my sincerity, to read the depths of my soul. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Some time to think?" she asked, her voice a faint echo of that long-ago night in the cafe. But this time the words were filled with a different kind of meaning. Not rejection, but a tentative invitation. I returned her smile, a genuine smile this time, filled with warmth and a burgeoning hope. "This time," I said, my voice firm, my gaze unwavering, "I'll wait." And I meant it. I would wait. I would be patient. I would be understanding. I would be whatever she needed me to be. I would earn her trust, her friendship, and maybe, just maybe, if the universe was kind, her love again. I would build a new life, here, near her, but on her terms.